One of the best setup openings to employ in chess as a beginner or an intermediate is known as the King's Indian setup, which actually can be played with both sides, and it's a great opening to get you developed and play the middle game from there. The King's Indian setup can be played in a variety of move orders. The position that you want to achieve as white and as well as black looks like this. Seems like nothing special to you? You are wrong. Let me show you why. I recommend starting with knight to f3, and then let's just have our opponent develop naturally with the most played moves. Your next move is g3, and then you fianchetto your bishop on g2. Then you castle, and the next key move is d3. d3 is designed as an anti-e pawn move because you don't want that your opponent is able to chase your knight away. That is also why you sometimes need to play 3 a little bit earlier. For example, what if black played knight c6 instead of f6 and took the full center? Now your opponent is able to play e4 and then e5 too fast, and we played d3 just a move earlier. That's why the pawn comes to d3, and then you can play castle or first play bishop g5, which allows you to play your knight to c3. You finish your development with castle, and you should be able to reroute it to the king side, but we will come to that in a moment. Let's rewind to the position where you decide if you want to castle or play bishop g5. If you want to play safer, you castle, and if black doesn't play h6, you play bishop g5 now with the intention to take the knight, but only when you are attacked. But occasionally your opponent plays h6 and you can't bring the bishop out this way. Then you can go b3 and you want to develop the bishop on b2. Then the most played move is bishop d6 and you fianchetto your bishop. Now you have 2 fianchetto bishops and a knight that all stare at the center. Now the only minor piece left is your other knight. You can put your knight on d2, and all of this is setting up an eventual pawn push in the center of the board, either to e4 with your e-pawn or with your c-pawn. You should not play both, because what will happen is you will block in your pieces. So I recommend that you try out both and see which move fits you better: a flank pawn attack or an eventual opening of the center. Now, how do you play from here on? The King's Indian is very flexible, but you try to create an attack on the same castled king. What does that look like? So for example, we choose e4. Black has 2 options from here. They either open the center by taking on e4, or they close the center with d4. If they open the center, the d file opens up for your rook, your black square bishop will become useful for the attack on the king, and your d2 knight either jumps to c4 or reroutes to the king side. But we'll talk about that in the closed position because that is a little more instructive. Let's rewind to this position and your opponent closes the position. We're going to try to create a kingside attack, and usually that involves either moving the knight to h4 or back to e1, and it's like, wait, what? Why would I undevelop my pieces? Well, now you want to start a f-pawn attack, so f4, to then mobilize your pieces that way, and that also can be played in the same regards with knight h4. So once you're starting to play this opening a few times and you watch some GM games, you're going to start to learn the dynamics between the knights and the bishops and how they work together. But this is the King's Indian setup with the white side. Congratulations. All right, let's flip the board. The King's Indian can be played anything that white plays. Let's start out with e4, because with e4 you have to change your move order a little bit, because if you move the knight right away, you're just going to get attacked. And you're in a totally different opening called the Alekhine defense. This is not what you want with black. So play d6 first, and now you are also in another opening that called the perk defense, but it leads to the setup we want. White's 2 most critical attacking methods are the Austrian and bishop e3 on move 4. Let's start with the Austrian attack, the 3-pawn attack. White starts a major pawn storm on the king side and wants to attack your knight, block your bishop, and make short castle very uncomfortable. So what should you do? If they attack your knight ever with e5, you usually move it to d7. As soon as it's safe, you should counter their kingside pawn storm with a queenside pawn break. Play c5 to undermine their center. If they take, you don't want their c-pawn instead, and if they already committed the e-pawn to e5, you take the e-pawn. Then your goal is to first castle and then try to take the other pawns in the center, because otherwise you would open up the lines between your queens, and after a queen trade, you can't castle, and white has great attacking potential. Let's rewind to this position. If your opponent has not committed the e-pawn, play around with queen, a5, or other counterattacking ideas. This will rarely happen at a lower level to you, but as a high level player, watch some GM games. The other way that white can play very aggressively is bishop e3 and queen d2, and white just goes after your dark squared bishop. So when you see them setting up like this, delay castling, and if they're trying to castle queenside, I recommend starting a pawn storm on the queenside and start to mobilize on that side of the board. If they're not setting up in one of these two ways and they're just playing some simple developing moves or some nonsense, then the setup is the same. Bishop g7, again, the d pawn is protecting the push. So if white pushes, you always take it. If you are not in the Austrian attack, and if they play normally and develop, you're going to do all the same moves. Get this bishop to g4, because the king's Indian is for black the same as with white. You just have one tempo less. So there are more counterattacking ideas for white. When you get attacked, or you have the chance to ruin their pawn structure, capture the knight. This knight develops in the center of the board and you play e5. Alright, now sometimes they play d4 or any other move and the setup is the same. For example, knight f3 you castle, they develop, the bishop comes out, and again, take when it makes sense, because otherwise you just traded a bishop for a knight, which is usually not that good. So you can just keep developing, and your counterattacking idea is f5 and e5. Therefore, you need to move this knight back to d6. You've got big pressure on the center, and you want to play f5, e5. This attack is the key in King's Indian defense positions, but you need to wait until the center is closed. Do not try to play f5 just by itself. You need to play e5, close the center, and then get a same side attack going on your opponent's hand. And they cannot push that early. If white directly goes for your knight, you treat on e5, you take their queen. Your opponent either has to retreat their knight or lose the right to castle. That's almost everything you need to know, because you can play it against anything white or black tries. Now subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.